D23 is a little ways behind us, but I wanted to make sure that I let all the news marinate in my brain before I shared my thoughts with you. So hopefully I can bring you something new. We're going to dive into everything that was announced, particularly for Disneyland Paris, and then we'll take a good look at how this ties into the larger overall strategy for Disneyland Paris. On 14, 15, and 16th of August this year, D23 took place as it does every other year. And once again, Disney Experiences was one of the most long awaited panels with a lot of news coming out of it. There were some expectations beforehand. I did do a predictions and hopes and wishes episode for D23. And I'm glad to say that about some of it I was wrong, about some of it I was right. But the stuff I was wrong about, I'm kind of happy about. And I'll let you know which one in particular, but if you've been listening for a while, then you might already have an idea. Before we get into all of that, hi, I'm Sarah, and this is Factor Nostalgia, the podcast where we dive into everything theme park then, now, and when, meaning the stories that made us, the stories behind the stories, and we're focusing on making future memories, which is why events like D23 are so important. If this is the type of content that you're interested in, then you could consider becoming a Patreon subscriber to support the podcast. The links to that will be in the show notes. Every tier on Patreon comes with its own perks. There's even a free tier if you're interested. And this is an excellent way for me to keep the podcast going. Now, the podcast will always be available for free to everybody, but there's some extra stuff if you decide to become a Patreon subscriber or a patron, if you will. Again, more information is in the show notes. Let's get into D23 because it's a big one this week, you guys. Now, the Disney parks are part of Disney Experiences. So those were the ones that were hosting a certain panel called Horizons at D23. They did not hold back this year, as I said. So we were talking about villains, there's monsters, there's web slingers, there's a Yeti, there's Tomorrowland, and a lot of news about Disneyland Paris. Well, I don't know if a lot is the correct qualifier, but big news for Disneyland Paris. So that's cool. Since the last D23, there's been some leadership changes. So where Josh Tomorrow was our parks guy first, or Disney Experiences, but essentially parks guy, he is now the CEO, which means that Thomas Mazloum is now our parks guy. Instead of him hosting D23 like Josh Tomorrow did before him, this event was hosted by Neil Patrick Harris. There's a tie-in to that, why him and all of that. And Thomas Mazloum actually did an accompanying interview to kind of give it a little bit more background on the decisions that were made, and they're going to keep making it for the foreseeable future. As for this episode, here's what we're going to do. We are going resort by resort through the biggest D23 announcements. And Disneyland Paris, we're going to save that for last because we're going to talk about that most. One, because the news shared about Disneyland Paris at D23 was some of the biggest. And also, as you guys know, I do consider that to be my home park. This podcast focuses a lot on continental Europe. So that's why we're going to put all the heavy stuff in there for Disneyland Paris. And I promise you guys, I'm going to try to bring something new and fresh because everybody and their grandma has already shared their thoughts on some of the news coming out of D23. So I'm going to try to tie it into a bigger story for you guys and bring you something fresh. Okay, so bear with me. Here we go. Let's start with Walt Disney World in Florida. Now, a couple months back, the Carousel of Progress closed for a big refurbishment, and they're actually changing the entire insides essentially of the ride. So they decided to keep this as a theme for D23. So they kind of went from past to present to future. We're not going to do that. We're going to go park by park or resort by resort, as I said. So first, let's start with the Carousel of Progress news, which is happening in Magic Kingdom. With all these new renovations, the mom and dad in the scenes will now be voiced by Jamie Lee Curtis and Bryan Cranston. So that's pretty cool. This will all hopefully happen from late spring of 2027. So by then we should start to see more of the new version of Carousel of Progress. Secondly, Magic Kingdom, as was announced last time, is getting a Villains Land. They decided to do a big name reveal. The name is Villains Land. Well, okay. News, I guess. I don't know. Everybody was already calling it Villains Land, so it's nice that they made it official. Now, what can we expect here? Because there was some speculation about which types of rides we could expect, and I've also, partaken in the speculation. I'll link to the episode where I did that in the show notes. But here's what we have: we have a broken wishing well, which kind of dipped the land in villainhood, a Maleficent themed coaster, and there's a magic mirror dark ride that has been confirmed and has been we've seen some concept art for that this D23. So I guess there's no Yzma Emperor Cusco type roller coaster with a pull the lever cronk, but who knows? Maybe we'll get something that hints to that still. Thirdly, we have Frontierland. They're expanding into Piston Peak, which means that there's going to be some car stuff. They confirmed that this is going to be themed to Miss Fritter. So that's the Demolition Derby school bus from, I think it was Cars 3. Plus, we will have a Cars Ridge Run Rally, which is a tongue twister, which will have guests racing mountain trails, erupting geysers, the elements essentially, with Lightning McQueen and Mater calling the action. So being there, kind of directing you as you go. Now, let's move on to Epcot. We have two big things happening here. First, Spaceship Earth is getting its first major update in a very long time. Now, this was supposed to happen a lot earlier, but COVID and leadership changes, and I don't know, just it didn't happen. But they're finally getting it. So they're expanding the story from human communication to a broader theme of human connection, while making sure that they keep, that optimistic voice that they have. And the big news here is that Figment and Dreamfinder are returning to Epcot for a new journey into imagination, which is something that was presented with Neil Patrick Harris coming back dressed as the Dreamfinder, which was something that was also already rumored before D23. Moving on to Animal Kingdom. There are three big things coming into Animal Kingdom that we know about. The big surprise, I guess, is that the Yeti inside Expedition Everest is being reanimated and brought back to life. This means that they probably have to dismantle the whole thing because the Yeti is huge, and the way the thing is set up, there's no easy way to do it. So it's probably going to be a long refurbishment. Tropical Americas is going to be welcoming Indiana Jones and the Myth of the Jade Serpent, which means that guests are going to be going into a Mayan temple facing a massive serpent inspired by Mayan mythology. And then finally, we have Antonio from Encanto, the little kid, the cousin who can speak to animals. His Fiesta de Encanto brings the Madrigal family into the park, and it will be inviting guests into Casita to explore these new rooms that were built for the attraction. So I'm very curious to see how that's going to work. There's been some cool patents and stuff. So I'm very curious to see how this pans out. Finally, for Walt Disney World, we're moving to Hollywood Studios, where Monstropolis, which is the new Monsters Inc. land, will open in 2027 with a Mike and Sully theater show, Harryhausen's, the restaurant where Mike took, what's her face? Celia, and Archie's Scare Pig Pizza. There's also an original song by Disney legend Randy Newman, particularly for the area. So that's cool. There were some details shared as well about the door coaster that we know is coming. And the land is opening, like I said, in 2027. It's not opening with the coaster. The coaster will be opening later. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're booking your trip, don't expect the coaster just yet if you're going in 2027. All right, those were the announcements for Walt Disney World. So I don't know which one you guys are most excited about. For me, it would be Villains Land because this offers the most, unique opportunity, possibly. They're leaning into the actual villainness of it all a little bit more rather than having, the villain as a comic relief type character, which is nice. One thing that they did during the event was they had Cruella de Vil come out. Not just any Cruella de Vil. No, it was Glenn Close dressed as Cruella de Vil. She was Cruella de Vil in the live action remake of 101 Dalmatians back in the day, the movies that we grew up on. I think it was 1996 that this movie came out. And she said that she wanted her own ride. And I don't know if that's something that's actually going to happen or not, but, we'll see. Nothing was officially announced, but it might have been a little teaser towards, I don't know, maybe the next D23. We'll see. What are you most excited about? Are you excited about the villains or the Yeti or Figment or what is it? Tell me. As always, all the ways to respond to the show will be in the show notes. I'm going to recap it at the end as well because all of this stuff, there's a lot that was shared and I want to know everybody's thoughts. All right. With Walt Disney World out of the way, that doesn't sound nice, does it? Anyway, with Walt Disney World now covered, let's move on to Disneyland Anaheim. Now, we can split the news for Anaheim into two sections, nostalgia and expansion. So, on the nostalgia side, we have a refreshed version of Remember Dreams Come True, the nighttime spectacular, returning to the park in February of 2027. There's an updated World of Color returning to Disney California Adventure that very same month. And the Magic Happens Parade is going to come back down Main Street, USA in the summer of 2027. Now, the biggest long term structural news, though, is Tomorrowland. This was a very off the cuff remark, really, that they made about Tomorrowland, and they didn't really mention anything specific. But Disneyland originally had the Land of the Future, was the idea for Tomorrowland, and that's what they're reimagining now. So there's going to be new attractions, more open space, a design meant to honor Walt Disney's original vision while giving guests new reason and inspiration to dream about the future. That's the intention. What that actually means, I don't know. Over in Disney California Adventure, we have Avengers Campus, which is doubling in size. I hope Disneyland Paris is paying attention. There will be two new attractions, Avengers Infinity Defense and Stark Flight Lab. They will open in 2028, and both will have returning film cast members doing the voice work. So that includes Robert Downey Jr., Anthony Mackie, and Brie Larson. So that's cool. California Adventure is also getting its first ever Coco attraction. That's the first Coco attraction of all Disney parks. So it's set a year after the film, and the queue is centered on a Casa Museo dedicated to Hector Rivera's music, and guests will travel by boat through Miguel's memories of the land of the dead. This is, of course, going to tie into the upcoming Coco 2, which was announced at the movie section of D23, which we're not going to get into this episode. All you need to know about the movie section, about the movies announced, is that it was like 99% sequels. So this was a lot quicker than the news for Walt Disney World, but I still want to know what you think. Do you think this Coco thing has merit? Do you think it's going to be fun? Is it going to be too much of a book report ride, as some Imagineers would call it, where it's too close to the movie? Or do you think it's going to introduce something new? Like, for example, how the Madrigal house in Animal Kingdom is going to be focused on Antonio rather than, what happened in the movie. Let me know your thoughts. As for Avengers, do you think that these rides could at some point come to Paris, or should they? Because we already have our own coaster, of course, which is essentially just a reimagining of the Rock and Roller Coaster featuring Aerosmith. But, who knows? Maybe this could prompt some inspiration for Disneyland Paris. What do you guys think? Now, let's move out of the US and look at some of the other international parks, because all the other parks also had some announcements. I say all the other ones, I mean the Asian parks. Again, we'll get to Paris, I promise. Now I'm going to do all the Asian parks in one take. So, get ready. Here we go. In Hong Kong Disneyland, we have an Avengers Pavilion coming, which will expand the Stark Expo skyline with a new Avengers Research Testing Lab experience alongside Peter Parker and a new Quinjet landing platform. I don't know if this is going to look similar to what we have in Disneyland Paris. It might not. Concept art is only concept art after all. Then, moving to Shanghai, more Avenger stuff. Shanghai will be the first Disney park getting a land built entirely around Spider-Man. So this will include a new coaster, a Spider-Man coaster, you guys, Spider-Bots, of course, and gadgets from the In-Universe Worldwide Engineering Brigade, WEB. We also see WEB, of course, at the ride that we have in Disneyland Paris. This is just something that's going to keep coming back also because there's cool merch that you can link to it. Then moving to Tokyo. Tokyo Disneyland's Tomorrowland is also undergoing a reimagining currently, and this is headlined by Space Mountain Earthrise, which is a brand new version of Space Mountain. We talked about this before, where Tokyo is actually not afraid to tear down a still popular ride because they can do better, and they will. So this is what the new version of Space Mountain is going to be, Earthrise. It will launch guests into the cosmos to see Earth from a new perspective, never done before in a Disney attraction, so they say. And for something completely different, they are also adding Sugar Rush Sweet Rescue, which is a Wreck-It Ralph themed ride where guests will join Ralph and Vanellope to rescue rogue sugar bugs while staying ahead of King Candy. Not entirely sure what that's going to look like. Wreck-It Ralph was not one of my favorite movies, but this does sound kind of cute. Okay, these were the announcements for the Asian parks. Do you think, I want to know, do you think that this Space Mountain, will it be better than ours? And when I say ours, I mean ours currently, but also ours of the future, which we're going to get into next. Because while Tokyo might be looking forward with their Space Mountain, Disneyland Paris is actually looking back. And I know that sounds like we're going to be talking about Disneyland Paris right now, but I want to do two quick things first. First, let's talk about the Disney Cruise Line real quick because that is part of Disney experiences and it has been growing and getting more traction, and Disney is putting a lot of effort towards growing it. So, quick announcements here. The Disney Believe, which is the ship that was announced a couple months back. I think they actually announced the name right after I recorded an episode with an introduction on all the ships. So, there's that. But it will set sail in 2027. Moana will be greeting guests in the Grand Hall with a statue. So every ship has its own statue in the Grand Hall. Here it will be Moana. Buzz and Woody are featured on the ship's exterior design. And they also confirmed that an all new class of ships will be arriving from 2029 onward. And the size of that will be between the classic and the newest ships in the fleet. So that means that they're probably aiming for new destinations that these larger ships can't get to because harbors are only so big or so small, right? Okay, that's what we needed to discuss about the Disney Cruise Line. Before we get into Disneyland Paris, also, like I said in the beginning, Thomas Musloom did an accompanying interview around D23 and the new direction, sort of, that he wants to take Disney experiences into. I keep referring to him as Parks Guy, so officially his title is Chairman of Disney Experiences. He did a sit down interview after his first D23 to kind of talk about, everything. And a few things stood out in that interview that I want to share with you guys. First, when asked about what he's most excited for guests to experience out of everything that was announced, he kept coming back to the word firsts. So, Villain's Land, the first Coco ride, the first Encanto attraction, and the first Lion King attraction that we're going to have in Disneyland Paris. He said, quote, "I'm most excited about our firsts, the things that we've never done before." So I don't know what that means for the future, but I think it does spell something nice in terms of, we might not be getting rehash of attraction, which is nice because then the parks get to keep their unique identities, in my humble opinion. Now, he also talked about which reveals actually landed hardest with the crowd in the room. And it wasn't really necessarily the newest IP and things like that. It was where the nostalgia factor was played up. And you see what I did there with the name of this podcast, right? Factor nostalgia. That was the part that got the most roars. Again, quote, "The reactions that I felt most in the room were around the fan favorite announcements, such as the reanimation of the Yeti at Expedition Everest, the return of Figment, Dreamfinder, and Spaceship Earth to Epcot, and of course, the transformation of Tomorrowland in Disneyland." Now, that's worth sitting with for a second because in a showcase full of brand new IP driven lands, and also not to mention Disney Adventure World that we just had, which is entirely IP driven, the loudest reactions in the room went to a Yeti getting fixed and a purple dragon coming back. Now, that tracks with everything that we kind of talk about on this show, right? All the stuff that made magic for us as kids that is getting some love now to give that a new life. So I want to know from you, does any of this surprise you that these legacy fixes, like the Yeti and Figment and everything, that those got bigger reactions than the new IP lands? Does that surprise you, or do you think, no, that tracks? And what does that tell you about what Disney Parks fans actually want right now? Personally, I think it's very telling. Of course, I'm biased because, again, the name of this podcast kind of hints to the stuff I like. But also, I can totally understand why they would lean into new IP because, just because we made our memories a certain way doesn't mean that the next generation has to do it the exact same way because the movies that they're growing up with are, to us, that's the new IP, and, and we get tired of seeing it. But this is the stuff that these kids are growing up on. So I get it. I don't want to hate on the new stuff. But this news in particular kind of, for me, hit home very much. Now, all of this brings us to the finale of this roundup. And that is for our very own Disneyland Paris. Now, this resort arguably had the most cohesive and best received news of the entire event. Not to mention, they led with Disneyland Paris news. And that's a first that Disneyland Paris gets that kind of love during D23, which is usually very US focused, of course. Okay, are you ready? Here we go. Disneyland Paris, our main event. What happened at D23? The platform D23 was used to lift the curtain on two experiences coming to Disneyland Park and fresh details on one of the most anticipated new attractions under construction at Disney Adventure World. Christoph Murphy, who is our new president in Disneyland Paris, following in the footsteps of Natasha Rafalski, framed it as nothing less than a new dawn of storytelling for the resort. So he tied together a new parade, a classic comeback for Space Mountain, and continued work on the Lion King themed area. The new parade thing, we'll get to that in a moment because that wasn't actually announced during D23. Let's get into that one first. That one was announced immediately after the broadcast of Horizons ended on the social media accounts of both Christoph Murphy, Disneyland Paris, the news accounts, you name it. They announced a new daytime parade coming in 2028. This will be, for the first time since 2017, a new parade for Disneyland Park. We've already seen some concept art for floats where we saw Aladdin, we saw Pinocchio, some other, classics coming back. The parade itself will be led by Mickey Mouse and Friends, which isn't necessarily new. Stars on Parade, which is currently playing, also has that. And we'll see what it'll actually bring. We know that for behind the scenes stuff that was shared, that more than 10,000 hours of research and development has gone into this. Nearly 225 costume, wig, and makeup sketches have been made so far. So it really looks like they're putting in effort to make this a brand new parade in all ways. So that's good news because Stars on Parade, it's still popular, but we've had it since 2017. It was at the time it was sort of introduced to the park for the 25th anniversary, and we're nearing the 35th. So it's about time we get something new, right? Or do you think that this is neither here nor there? Um, are you excited about the idea of seeing new or other classics in this parade? Yes or no? Were you hoping for a different theme? Personally, on the one hand, yes, time for a replacement for Stars on Parade. On the other hand, I would have liked to see a nighttime parade much more than this, particularly with the 35th anniversary coming up. But that's just me. Second announcement for Disneyland Paris. This one was more of an update. Now, during the last D23 in 2024, we got the official confirmation that we're getting a Lion King land. This year, they presented it as the Circle of Life, taking on new meaning at Disney Adventure World. The first ever Lion King attraction will bring Simba's story to life, which means that, again, this is a book report type ride where we just follow the movie. So we're following Simba from curious cub to king. And Disneyland Paris supplemented this with some detail that fans really wanted to see. There will be the first ever audio animatronics figure of Scar, which was shown in concept art. And that's actually used to recreate the confrontation scene from the 1994 movie. Once again, they reconfirmed that this ride will be based on the animated movie from 1994, even though the original concept art shared 2 years ago featured the live action, well, it's not even live action, the CG remake. But that was clearly just, again, concept art is just concept art. This will be based on the animated movie. Now, this attraction is going to anchor Disneyland Paris' first fully immersive Lion King land, which has been under construction for a while, since fall 2025, next to or near World of Frozen on Adventure Bay. You can see it from parts of World of Frozen, Adventure Way, Adventure Bay. You can see like the cranes and everything. And the walls that are sectioned off, that are sectioning off that area are actually themed to the Lion King. So that's nice. So again, this is what we know about it. It's a water-based dark ride featuring audio animatronics figures of Simba, Timon, Pumbaa, Scar. The film's soundtrack, there will be 3 drops, including a 16-meter plunge from Pride Rock itself. Once it's finished, the full theme zone will span more than 30,000 square meters, which is huge. It'll include a shop and a dining location. And Michel den Dulk of Walt Disney Imagineering in Paris, the Dutch guy, Michel den Dulk. He said the team wanted guests to feel the film's emotion and thrills through the villain. Also confirmed, Wilderness Explorer Sky Swings. So that's the, what do you call that? The flying carousel. which is Up Inspired, will open next year on Adventure Way. We already knew that. It's an infill ride, uh, I can't get too excited about that, but it's nice to have a little bit of added capacity. Right. So, Lion King, not a whole lot of news. I feel like a lot of people treated this as bigger than it was, because we knew it was going to be a book report ride. And yet people seem like super excited that we're going to see Scar. And I'm like, what? That makes sense if it's a book report ride. Now, maybe this is just me being cynical. I don't know. I'm still excited for the ride. Do not get me wrong. Lion King is still my favorite movie to this day. But I was hoping for something along the lines of maybe a year in which this will open, perhaps even a season in which this will open. And we got none of that. So I'm hoping that next year by April 12th, they usually do, Disneyland Paris's birthday. They usually do some announcements. I'm hoping that they'll announce something there because this was not it for me. This felt a little disappointing to me. Let me know what you think. Do you think that I'm being too cynical and I expected too much? Or are you with me on this and saying they could have at least given us, a ballpark year in which they want to open this thing? Or heck, maybe even a name for the land? Let me know. And with that, we're going to the biggest news for Disneyland Paris, which was the first piece of news shared at Horizons, and that is Space Mountain. Now, I was cracking jokes about this and saying, oh, I'm hoping this will happen and assuming it wouldn't. But you guys, Space Mountain is coming back. It's bringing back the moon. For the uninitiated, there's a hashtag out there called Bring Back the Moon. And this has been, I don't know how long people have been using it. But Star Wars, the current overlay of Space Mountain, which also changed the name from Space Mountain to Hyperspace Mountain, that was supposed to be a temporary overlay in 2017, again, for the park's birthday. So that has been in place now for a long time, a very long time. The coaster itself was built in 1995. So almost half of its lifespan has been spent as a Star Wars ride. And not a good one, not a particularly good one. I mean, it's fun. And yes, Star Wars has its fans and all that. And I get that. But to me, it always felt like a little bit of a lazy overlay because it has screens and everything. And I remember Space Mountain before Star Wars. And I think that makes the big difference. Okay, before we get into all my personal stuff, let's go through the announcements. Space Mountain de la Terre à la Lune is coming back. Star Wars Hyperspace Mountain will close at the end of 2027. And Walt Disney Imagineering Paris will restore the ride to its original 1995 version, inspired by Jules Verne's From the Earth to the Moon. The refurbishment is going to go beyond cosmetics, so there will be new indoor sets and props, a redesigned queue where guests can watch trains in motion again, which was the Skywalk. We saw that on the concept art as well, and enhanced effects on the iconic launch sequence. Now, this means that the cannon that is used that was used for the original story, the Columbiad cannon, will also come back in full effect with all its special effects. Composer Steve Bramson's original score is going to return, fully remastered, and the story is going to shift to an idealized version of humanity's first trip to the moon, told through Discoveryland's steampunk aesthetic. Now, this is going to build on 30 plus years of technical upgrades that are already in place. So, fairly recently, they did the exterior dome lighting in 2025. They renewed all of that. And Keith Rector, who's the senior manager of creative art direction at Disney Imagineering Paris, called it both an honor and an exciting challenge to reimagine a ride that set the standard when it opened in 1995. The reason why they say that is that Space Mountain, when it first opened, literally saved Disneyland Paris. Disneyland Paris was not doing well when it first opened. They didn't know how to draw in crowds. They didn't know how to keep the crowds there for multiple nights, whereas they had built a bunch of hotels, and Space Mountain changed a lot of that. I did a full breakdown on all of that in previous episodes. I'll link to all of that in the show notes if you want to know more about the history of the park and Space Mountain in particular. So you can listen to that if and when you want to. But this news, you guys, I think all the Disneyland Paris geeks and fans, really, this had us screaming, yelling, and being happy. I have not seen any negative responses to this at all. Hyperspace Mountain has had a 10-year run Tokyo announced its own new version of Space Mountain with Earthrise, and where again, as I said, that one is future focused, and we're going back to honestly back into the past with this one. Initially, I thought if they ever do bring this back, it's going to be a Mission 3 because we had Space Mountain, the original, then came Space Mountain Mission 2 with a new score, and then we had Hyperspace Mountain. So Mission 3 would have made sense, I think, but this is fantastic that they're bringing this one back. And I'm so excited to see how that goes. And also, what they mentioned about the sets and the props, that is what made Space Mountain to me. Not the screens that they currently have on Hyperspace Mountain, but the physical props that you zoom past when you're on the coaster, on the ride. That's just fantastic. And now the outside will finally match the inside again. And I am so excited for this, you guys. I have been waiting for this, and I never thought that they would announce it. First of all, this year, the way they did, oh my gosh. I'm so excited about this one. And those of you who've been listening for a while, you guys know that. With that immediately comes the danger of people like me setting their expectations too high. So what do you think? Do you think this is a good thing that they're going back to the original, or should they do something else in order to kind of curb those expectations? Let me know what you think. And of course, them removing Star Wars from here, do you think that opens up the possibility of Star Wars, Galaxy's Edge or anything like that becoming an option again for Disney Adventure World? Because that, of course, is an option too. I don't know. Just throwing it out there. Now, this was all the D23 news when concerning parks and experiences. But I wanted to tie this into something that Disney announced a couple days later. Disneyland Paris, I should say, announced a couple days later. And that is their new initiative called the New Magic Program. In the communication around this Space Mountain refurb or restoration, they call it a definitive milestone in a new phase of something called the New Magic Initiative. This is a program that Disney says is focused on refreshing classic attractions to, in their words, surprise and delight all generations of guests. Now, this isn't about the rebrand of just one ride. It's being positioned as an ongoing philosophy for how Disneyland Paris treats its heritage attractions going forward. So from this point on, here's what we know so far. New Magic is described as an ambitious program. You can't see this, but I'm doing air quotes. Aimed squarely at improving guest experience by refreshing classic attractions rather than replacing them. It's driven by the Walt Disney Imagineering Paris team specifically, so that's a signal that this is a resort level creative priority and not just a maintenance thing. Space Mountain de la Terre à la Lune is being called a defining milestone of a new phase, which implies that New Magic itself launched a bit earlier and is now escalating. An earlier project already falls under this banner. And if you've been listening, then you know this. Enhanced scenery along the rivers of the Far West in Frontierland based on original designs by Disney legend and Imagineer Mark Davis. We saw new signs and things go up around Fort Comstock in Frontierland and Legends of the Wild West. And Disney says there are several other projects already in development at different stages to be unveiled in phases, meaning that Space Mountain almost certainly will not be the last classic attraction refresh that we hear about. Here's what we can note about this. Rivers of the Far West leaned on Mark Davis's original unbuilt concepts for other parks, and Space Mountain is being restored to its 1995 storyline rather than getting a new IP overlay or becoming Mission 3 or anything like that. That's a very specific creative direction, miming the resort's own design archive and its founding attractions instead of only chasing new franchise tie-ins, which was kind of Bob Iger's thing. It's also worth connecting this back to what Thomas Mazloum told us drove the biggest reactions in the room at D23, so Yeti, Figment, Spaceship Earth, Tomorrowland, and across the entire global showcase, nostalgia restoration is having a moment. And Disneyland Paris's New Magic program is arguably the most deliberate, branded version of that instinct anywhere in the company right now. One thing that I noticed, for example, with, the restoration of these existing rides, one thing that has become kind of a running joke among Disneyland Paris fans is, for example, Pirate Galleon in Adventureland, Captain Hook's ship right outside of Skull Rock. This has been marked as closed since the pandemic hit, I think. And recently, I posted this on my Instagram stories. If you're following me on Instagram, you might have seen it there. but they changed it in the app from closed to closed for refurbishment. So I think that this is another sort of puzzle piece in this new Magic program. I think that Pirate Galleon might also finally get some love and get the restoration that it needs and deserves. Now, I want to know what you think. I recently did an episode with Beth from Dedicated to DLP from that podcast around Fort Comstock and what we think, makes our Disney park, I say our Disney park as in the one in Paris, so unique is, the storytelling around things like Frontierland and the walkthroughs and these delicate intentional things that were placed in the park, such as, a Legend of the Wild West, Pirate Galleon, the Rivers of the Far West, the way we have it set up here, as opposed to, the ones that we have seen abroad. Do you think that Disney is making the right decision by focusing on restoring original versions and the original vision, really, of this park versus a retheme of aging attractions? Do you think they're making the right decision here? Is this the right call? And which attraction would you want to see in the next phase? Because I've already heard some people ask about the Nautilus. So Pirate Galleon is pretty high up on the list. We have seen some intense work finally happening on Alice's Curious Labyrinth. So apparently, a lot of the features and mechanics are finally working again, and everything got a nice little paint job, which is desperately needed. So what could be next? What do you think? And does this mean that we're actually not getting any new rides anymore in Disneyland Park? Let me know what you think. For me, I'm excited about this because, like I said, there's a lot that makes Disneyland Paris unique among the Disney parks. And when I say Disneyland Paris, I mean specifically the Disneyland Park in Disneyland Paris. So the Castle Park. So I'm happy to see it getting some love. A while back when they announced Josh D'Amaro as new CEO, I wrote an open letter to him that I read here on the podcast. And some of that stuff is finally happening, you guys. So I don't know. I don't know. Is somebody at Disney listening to this? Who knows? I know I'm not the only one who holds these opinions, so probably not. But it would be cool though, right? Anyway, if you have any other theories, let me know. Let's hear them. Let me know what you think. Are they making the right decision? Are they focusing on the past too much? Were you hoping for something else? Personally, I think it's nice that, they leave Disneyland Park, the Castle Park, focused on the nostalgia and the memories and the uniqueness of how the park was set up. That original vision for Disneyland Park was really unique. So I'm glad they're sticking to it. And the new stuff and the immersive new worlds and the world building that they can do, that's IP driven, that really belongs in Disney Adventure World with its new identity. So I think that's probably a good call. At the same time, I do hope that some of the parts in Disneyland Park, in the Castle Park, will get some love because there's a whole section behind Space Mountain, around Discoveryland in general, that still has a lot of potential, which we're going to get into in a future episode. So stay tuned for that. Whew, okay, so that was all the D23 news, you guys, and how it ties into the new Magic initiative at Disneyland Paris. So, a lot of people say, oh, this was a big one. Was it though? Or did they just announce a bunch of stuff that we already knew, except for the Space Mountain thing? I don't know. What do you think? Villains Land, Monstropolis, Walt Disney World, a reimagined Tomorrowland, and bigger Avengers campus at Disneyland in California, new lands for Spider-Man and the Avengers and the Tokyo parks, a new Space Mountain in Tokyo, and to close it all out, Disneyland Paris's trio of reveals. We have the parade, we have the Scar animatronic, and the return of Space Mountain. Let me know all your thoughts. You can do that by commenting directly on the episode if you're listening on Spotify or YouTube, or you can drop a comment on Instagram. If you don't want to do any of that, you can contact me through the contact page at factornostalgia.com. Links will be in the show notes, along with the links to Patreon if you've decided that you do want to become a Patreon subscriber. And before you go, make sure that you share this episode with somebody who might be interested, who might have thoughts on all of this. Leave a rating or a review in whatever podcast player you're using to listen to this, and make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss any future episodes, because we have some good stuff coming up, you guys. Some really good stuff. All right, that's it for today's episode. Thank you very much for listening, and I will catch you in the next one.